So thank you very much for this enlightening talk with a lot of energy. Indeed, we have to go for action, and I concur with that. We now have a roundtable, so there will be still room for questions. So Sebastian is the director of public affairs of APELL, the European organization of open source companies. We have Timo, who is the executive director of APELL. So Jutta Horstmann from ZenDiS is staying with us, and we have Thibaut Kleiner from DG Connect, who is also part of the roundtable. And finally, we have Marie Kreil from Prototype Fund. So please sit and come on stage for the roundtable, and we pass the hand to Sebastian.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Wait for everybody to sit down. My name is Sebastian Raible, and thank you for the introduction. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the keynotes to Mr. Kleiner and to Jutta Horstmann. We have had we've had a fantastic introduction already to the morning, and I'm really excited to see everyone here on stage. I started in September as the Director for EU Governmental Affairs for APELL. And APELL is an association of associations. We have the European Business Associations on Open Source as members, and we are currently in 8 European countries, 8 members currently there, representing hundreds of businesses from individuals to small and medium-sized and large companies, but also public administrations and individuals. As well as research. I shouldn't forget research. It was already said in the introductory keynotes that digital technology is very much at the core of the functioning of our society, and in particular, individual communication is a day-to-day necessity that we have, and it is all at the core really of the functioning. But also businesses highly depend on digital technology. But as Europe, as European countries, as European businesses even, we depend highly on the key services and products to be provided from outside the EU. I couldn't even stress more how much competition there is and how dire the situation might look. But at the same time, and I think Thibaut Kleiner put it marvelously, we have a lot of decentralized talent in Europe. We have companies all over Europe, and not least, it is represented here at this conference. I think what is really important is that we realize this strategic talent, this strategic importance of the sector, and that we need to strengthen it today. So yeah, with open source, we can help reduce these dependencies. We can provide a more sustainable, reliable innovation, and we can provide secure alternatives to the vendors that are currently very centralized. And all of this holds a estimated worth of several billion euro in itself. And if you believe the study that was released, several trillion on the demand side. With us here today, Jutta Horstmann from the ZenDiS. You have just heard her keynote. We have Marie Kreil from the Prototype Fund in Germany. And we have Timo Väliharju, my colleague from the APELL board, and he is also the president of the Finnish member organization. And last but not least, Director Thibaut Kleiner from DG Connect. So before I leave this microphone, because I don't have one in hand yet, I will ask you the question, do we need a strategy from the European Commission and the member states to establish European digital sovereignty, and how do we do that? And let's start with your introductions, and then you can answer the question already. Timo, please.
Okay, so actually the presentation was okay, so I'm not going to talk anymore about myself. Absolutely we need a single strategy, But how to do it, that's a difficult question. And for example, in Finland, I think that the government is saying that open source is good, but they are not doing anything about it. And that's the problem. So we lack actions in most of the governments in European level. So I know that a lot of Finnish, let's say, public administration is actually using open source, and they are also procuring open source from the companies. But nobody is saying out loud that this is something that we want to really do. And we prefer open source, and maybe it's the procurement law or something that prevents them to favor open source as such, even though it's possible. So if you want to, for example, procure certain software that is open source, you can say it out loud. But they are not doing it in most of the cases because they are afraid that something happened or they are sued by the proprietary companies that why do you do this, because we have also a solution for here. But for example, if you want to buy, let's say, learning platform Moodle, you can actually to make a procurement that I want Moodle, and that's it. And there is a court cases also in Finland that's okay, because it's open source. It's not against competition law, because everybody can actually do services with certain open source software. The companies that don't want to do it, it's a more or less business decision. It's not against the law, because if they, let's say Microsoft could offer Moodle if they want, no problem with that, but they just don't want to do it. So that's why it's possible. So a lot of issues, and I think that the biggest one is this fear of procuring open source and saying that it's the thing that we want.
I'll take over to introduce myself just for context. I'm director of Prototype Fund. We're a German open source fund funded by the Federal Ministry for Education and Research. And I'm very much the funder on this panel, but also the civil society person, the open source community person, more than a policy person. And I generally am not a fan of the word sovereignty as much as I agree with the concepts behind it. The sovereignty comes with the idea of borders somehow, and open source communities don't know borders. And if you look at large projects like Debian is not in one country. If you look like even open source companies like Nextcloud, it's based in Germany, but people from all around the world work at and with Nextcloud. So as a funder, what I am wanting next to all the other policy steps that my colleagues are probably better qualified to talk about is that we need funding at EU level. We as Prototype Fund have been telling a lot of people, we want to fund your project, but only this part of your team, not because this part is more qualified, not because this part is more relevant, but because they're based in Germany and that somehow this funding only works like this. So at a time where Trump is taking over in America, which last time ended up in the Open Tech Fund, which Jutta already talked about being closed down, which is maybe going to happen again, and they're funding most of this community. If you talk about tools for journalists, tools for activists, circumvention tools, security tools, they're mostly funded by OTF in this community. We don't know what's going to happen with it. We have the STF in Germany, the Sovereign Tech Fund, which has also been talked about, but we need more of those. We need more international ones. We need more European ones. And I mean, you've said that NGI is not in danger, but we funders are still very worried, and they're doing excellent work. These funds need support. We need more of them, and we need to keep building structures and very different ways of distributing money to fit all the needs.
Jutta.
Thank you. So I totally agree with the speakers before me, and that I think there is a dire need for a European strategy. We have seen that in Germany, that a strategy helps for starting things off. Like there was a strategy built that included a priority on open source when software is procured by the public sector, and it included setting up proper governance bodies like the ZenDiS or the Sovereign Tech now agency. And so strategy is definitely the first step, but then there needs to be execution. And this is something that we saw in Germany was not as good as it could have been. And this also included like funding. So in the end, it's always back to the money. So what I hope for the European level is a good combination of a strategy that provides regulation which is not like over-regulating a market and making companies jump through any bureaucratic hoops, but instead making sure that any regulation that happens always includes the open source aspects. What we currently are seeing is that the opposite is the case. Like with any regulation that came out in the past years, like the Cyber Resilience Act or the AI Act or the Product Liability Directive, it had always be very necessary to for free software lobbyists and advocates to make sure that these regulations were adapted to the needs of the open source company. So regulation would help, but it needs to be a open source first regulation. And I think there's another very important topic that we should look at, which is infrastructure. And here we advocate for setting up an Eurostack that shows how open source can work throughout all of the stacks and software layers. And the third one is open standards. So they are open standards, but with the European community also as a standardization body, they should way more look into applying open standards wherever possible.
So Thibaut Kleiner from the European Commission. In Brussels, it's always hard to get a commitment from the European Commission, but maybe we can make use of the fact that we are not in Brussels but in Paris, so nobody essentially is listening in Brussels. What can you already commit to when it comes to digital sovereignty strategy from the Commission?
So thank you, but at the same time, I think that politicians, words are cheap always. So I mean, it's for me, and I will repeat more or less what was said here. I don't think that strategy as such is the solution, because we've had many strategies over the past years. What matters is not only execution, but it's also to move to action. And my hope is that now with Mrs. Virkkunen, she's also very pragmatic as a politician. I don't think that we need a strategy necessarily if we do the right thing immediately, because also we don't have time. Basically, I wouldn't want that we go in these usual, Brussels-based discussions where for 1 year we exchange, we debate with the Parliament, the Council, and so on. And then you've wasted 1 year in discussion instead of going directly to action. I would also say that digital sovereignty now is clearly at the heart of our policies. I think this is something that was not the case 5 years ago, but I think now if you look at the discussions, it is clearly at the heart of what we want to pursue. Also because people have realized that it's a matter almost of life and death in terms of our future competitiveness. But at the same time, I think that people also nuance sovereignty and open source. I mean, open source is clearly an instrument for digital sovereignty, but it should not be an end in itself. What we need is to make open source model also sustainable, because the alternative is just public support. I don't think this is the future. We cannot just rely on subsidies from governments to maintain open source communities. We need to find valuable and viable business models that will make this a real alternative. And there I think that is really on probably procurement where we can do something. But also on the Eurostack you were mentioning, that's something that I'm currently really supporting very strongly in many discussions, because this is what we miss today, a recognition, a brand that can aggregate the catalog of solutions that are made in Europe and that people can also relate to. Because as somebody was saying earlier, they don't even know the names of the software, because there are too many. And sometimes, these open source, solutions, you have 15 people. So supporting that, it's very good, but you don't know for how long. And that's why we are now supporting an initiative around digital commons. There are 20 member states that were the initiative of this. And the idea is to create a European digital infrastructure consortium that would provide durable support to the open source communities. We see this as essential to have also the kind of back office support for these communities to make them a credible alternative.
And European open source businesses are manifold and are distributed across Europe. But we somehow, I think in this community, this is no news. We know that open source businesses, they don't need to form bigger corporations together. They don't need to be fused together, but they can cooperate on open source while maintaining competition. Is that the model forward and the way for the next 4 years when it comes to the Commission and the Parliament? Is this the way forward for the SME landscape for tech businesses in Europe? Timo.
Yeah, thank you. First, I would like to say that the problem for open source businesses is that they are too small to compete with the bigger companies that come from the US and other countries. So there is no resources for lobbying. The sales processes are, let's say, not that good if we have resources to do it. And cooperation, of course, is very important. But there is so many different ways to cooperate. So if you are in one, community member, and then you need to be another, so you need to make a business decision that these two communities are the ones that I can actually work with. So if you have 50 people working as doing services for certain open source software, you don't have time to cooperate in other communities because it's impossible. You need to make money in order to survive, and in order to make money, you need to focus on something. So trying to cooperate in open source level in general is nice, and also learn with other companies that are doing the same, maybe business models, maybe ways how community works, how to cooperate with communities, but it's difficult. And if you are a 5 million euro company in Europe doing only open source, you're actually pretty big. So if you are 20 million, you are a huge open source company in European level. So I would like to see also some mergers in European level, so we could actually create a bigger company group that would actually work with one company and make services to the different customers in European level. So I think most of the entrepreneurs like me, when they reach maybe 5 million euro, you are starting to look at, okay, what would be the buyer of my company, so I can retire or do something like that. So we lack also a little bit ambition to grow in European level.
Jutta, from a perspective of working with governments, with public administration, in public procurement contracts, the sharing of innovation, is that something that's going to be interesting for open source businesses, not only in Germany but in Europe? If we need people that already know the authorities and already know the people in the cities that they are working in, is that something that you can say from your perspective?
Absolutely. So I think what we are currently building in Germany might be a proper blueprint for doing that on a European level as well. Like having a body like the ZenDiS who is able to bridge between the public sector and the SMEs in the countries, and if needed, create consortia. Like you talked about mergers, but it doesn't have to be a merger. It can be just joining forces together to create a product like OpenDesk, which is then made fitting to the public sector needs. And I think this idea can totally be scaled on a European level.
Thank you. Marie Kleiner, Marie Kreil. I was afraid that this might happen. But Thibaut Kleiner has said that prototyping has really helped Ukraine in their efforts of fighting back against the Russian aggression. The Prototype Fund supports many small projects and upcoming innovators, and now focuses on security and infrastructure. How is that, and is prototyping the way forward for digital sovereignty?
So I'm 100% convinced that open source, free and open source software lives from communities. It comes from communities. The big projects we know come from communities. If you think about OpenStreetMap and that kind of projects, it's never first a business idea. It's, I want this tool to exist. I'm going to build it. Then I'm going to figure out a way to make it live. We at Prototype Fund don't really have an opinion on whether a tool should be a business or not. We think it really depends on the tool. Some tools are very well equipped to be a business, some are not. Jutta already said it. Some tools will always need long-term funding to exist, and they're important infrastructures. But the ideas that we see come from civil society, and that's why we need that kind of funder that's lightweight and that allows people to start with their ideas and then figure out what the next steps could be. The classical bottom-up innovation, which makes me also say we should not forget maintenance in our funding always, because lots of institutions love funding innovation, so do we. But that's not the only thing we can do. We can't just produce graveyards of open source projects as funders. That's just a shame for the money. We've discussed in the preparation of this panel if up-and-coming communities and their support are important. We do fund a lot of students and very young people, but we also fund up 40 years old that have a career in proprietary software that then say, I want to do my own project, I want to do something that makes sense for me, I want to do open source. And that's also a form of funding new people into doing open source and building our infrastructure together with us. One thing that's really important to me is that these people are experts. There are people who have a lot of experience, and funders, policy, and other interest groups love setting the trends and saying, now we're funding AI, now we're funding blockchain, now it's time for this and that, and we should not forget to respect the nature of these open source communities. They have a lot of experience. They stand for values, for decentralization, for adaptable software, for talking with their users, trying to adapt to what people need. And when I heard the word use communities before, and we should not forget that we're talking on eye level with experts and also let them tell what they should do. And as a last point, our goal should not be to rebuild the new Google with our funding. We should not try to reproduce, we should try to do better, I think. And we need to strategize when we fund to make sure this happens.
Speaking with businesses, one of the biggest points seems to be that investors are very apprehensive as soon as it comes to funding something where the business says, well, let's make it open source, or let's publish this innovation in the way that we do in the open source field, makes investors track back very often. What kind of hurdles do you see are there to funding and investment, and do we need to regulate or deregulate more in that sense? Jutta or Timo?
I think so. What we're currently seeing in a different field in terms of sustainability is that there hasn't been a lot of investment in like ecological issues for quite a long while. And now we have regulation in that area, like the CSRD, what is it called? Yeah, the regulation, the directive. Yeah, sure, but this regulation on corporate social responsibility, making sure that companies report on their efforts towards sustainability. And now with that regulation out there, we see that a lot of impact funding is starting to happen because there now is a need for products and services in that area. So I think regulation definitely can provide impulses to the market on where funding should go. So I think seeing how it worked for impact funding and the sustainability area, I think the same could be done in the open source area as well. And one last, what I meant here in terms of, it does not necessarily have to be regulation, like any legislative means. Like if there are laws telling the public sector to procure only open source software, this would exactly give the impulses for funding, for investors funding companies that are providing these means.
I've been talking quite a lot with kind of venture capitalist companies and the companies that are actually trying to buy other companies and making more money out of that. And the problem is that if you are a company that is doing open source and making money with that, even if it's profitable, it's very difficult to explain the potential buyer that what is the business here, and they are usually asking that what's the IP here. I think, okay, well, yeah, our company is our IP, so we have a brand and we use open source and we make money with that. Yeah, but what is the IP here? Because we want to buy some IP here. So this is actually a real conversation that I went with some Canadian company that we were talking about. They wanted to buy one of my companies, and it was impossible discussion. They just didn't understand that what is open source and how to make money with that. It may be a little bit easier if you are a founder of a certain open source project. You probably would get funding in some way because it's a different thing. But if you are a company that is using open source software to make money, it's a really difficult deal to make them understand that what we are doing here.
Thibaut Kleiner with please a very quick answer because we're running out of time. Do we have to change the rules for investment?
I mean, we have to facilitate investment, that's for sure. And one thing that is worrying us today in Brussels is that we see that somehow the regulation is creating also some burden. So we want to simplify also the legislation to make it easier for people to look at this and use it as an asset. Because something I didn't say, but I think it's really a competitive advantage of open source is that we can design it in line with our values, in line with our legislation, but also in line with our values. So it's really a difference with software that comes from other regions, because it's really something that differentiates what it can do in terms of privacy enhancing and so on. But investment is at the end of the day, I mean, you said it right, you invest because there is a return on investment. So we need to build the business models around open source so that people realize that there is something that is sustainable and that they will make money at the end of the day. And money should not be seen by the open source communities as a problem. I think it should be seen as a necessary element for this to continue, because I'm telling you that public sector is running out of cash. So that cannot be the solution.
With Trump coming, with tariffs coming, with governments imploding, now France joined the club with Germany. Soon we will have to pay everything in Bitcoin. What can we do about it? Which projects give you hope? What can others learn from the open source community? Marie?
First, don't buy Bitcoin. Think of the planet. I think we can learn from the basics, like the ideas that the open source community has been carrying for years, like the decentralization. I've said it before, the lightweight structures of not building extremely giant companies with a lot of consultants and whatever in it, the adaptability, and the long-term vision. Like, people in open source are people who fight for dozens and dozens of years of their career for the same values and who stay on track. And funders, policy, or us, we tend to have a bit of ADHD and jump on the trends. Personally, when I see what I need in my work on the everyday basis to function, it's a way to share my documents. It's actually a Nextcloud that is very stable. It's not some AI that does my job for me. And we should first stick with the basics that the open source community has been working on for a very, very long time.
Yeah, in Finland, I would say that there's one project that we are actually now negotiating with the municipalities. So I managed to sell them an idea that we could actually make a municipality, community that would be discussing, let's say, maybe once a month that we need this a software service like next year or this year or something like that. So they would find some common ground, not always buy the software as one community municipality buys that and the second one buys that, but to cooperate in open source. So I would like to put them to discuss about the needs that they have, and then we would actually recommend them that this is the open source software that we can actually deploy here. There's a lot of good solutions, but there is no knowledge in municipalities. So I think that is some encouraging that they are even thinking about this cooperation in Finland.
What gives you hope, Jutta?
I think a project that gives me really hope is the collaboration between OpenDesk and La Suite, because it shows that European governments can work together, they can share resources and together develop solutions that will make a shared digital sovereignty, which is not ending at one nation's borders, a real possibility.
Timo.
I think we have a lot of assets and we should be optimistic about our capabilities. So I would conclude by making basically a call for action somehow, because right now I'm trying to work on this notion of Eurostack. And what I need from you is to give me all the good products that we could put in such a catalog to show that together we have actually an alternative to the proprietary solutions.
Thank you, everyone. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, we can take one or two questions very quickly. We had one question here.
Well, just one question. For a public or private company or public administration, if you have a contract with Microsoft, even if you have a blackout on your grid, it's not a problem because you have the contract with Microsoft and you are not at risk as a CFO, as a CTO, a CEO. So when we shift to open source, as a company, as an administration, how can we shift from this executive level to the SLA and contract management to a decentralized management of skills and kind of SLA? How can we do that? Is the European Commission able to fund this shift?
Yeah. Yeah, as a short comment for this question, I think that the only solution for this is that you need to be big enough in order to do it. So if you are not growing, it's impossible to do with 2 people. But if you have 50, it's possible to do. Yeah, and that's why we need more business attitude in open source. So we need to grow in order to survive.
So another question. So we heard a lot about the problems, the dependencies on the US and open source companies are too small. I mean, to fund it and a big problem. May I offer a suggestion, a solution for that? It's actually not that hard. If we decide in Germany alone spends 14 billion on proprietary software, we just heard, right? If France, Germany, the European Commission, everybody decides with a transition period of 1 or 2 years, after 2 years, everything we purchase is open source with a transition period. This will lead to an explosion of innovation, of open source companies, of like business models, of more projects and innovation, job creation, and overall. I think it's a very easy solution.
Does somebody wants to answer? No?
Yeah, I totally agree on that. Yeah, so we could actually do it. There's no law that actually prohibits us to do exactly what you said.
I think that's a great idea, but again, I don't think we can go from 0 to 100. I think we need to have an intermediate step, and for me, 20% is already something that we can do, you know. And I think that's a kind of almost a magic number because it would scale up massively the communities. But again, let's do it as you know, as you were saying, you know, cross-border and on a pan-European basis, because that's the scale that we need for this development.
Thank you very much. We really have to close now. This closes the European track, and thank you very much for the speakers to come.